She sat me in the corner of the dining hall. That's where I watched my grandchildren celebrate their business launch through a swinging door behind a table of empty coffee cups. I raised them, every scraped knee, every homework assignment. But when the champagne popped and the toasts began, I wasn't part of it. Not even close. I smiled, stayed quiet, and after the last bite of cake, I made a decision that would change everything. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, cream-coloured envelope with gold trim. I remember how my hands trembled as I opened it, thinking maybe they finally wanted to acknowledge everything I'd done. Inside was a generic printed card. Join us in celebrating the launch of Turner Family Investments. No personal note, no phone call to follow up, just an address and time. Like I was any random guest they needed to fill the room. I spent 2 days deciding what to wear, finally settling on the blue dress I'd bought for their high school graduation, carefully steamed and pressed. The venue was expensive, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I arrived early, clutching my small purse, searching the room for familiar faces. That's when Emily, my eldest granddaughter, spotted me. She hurried over, her smile tight and professional. "Grandma, you made it?" she said, air-kissing near my cheek. "We have a special place for you." I followed her, heart lifting slightly. Maybe they did care after all. But she led me to a corner table, partially hidden behind a decorative pillar. "You'll be comfortable here," she explained, already turning away. "Less noise, you know, and the servers will make sure you have everything." Before I could respond, she was gone, swept back into the crowd of investors and business partners. I sat alone at a table for one, watching through the archway as my 3 grandchildren, the children I had raised since they were toddlers, worked the room like strangers. I thought about the night their parents left, the rain pounding on the roof, the phone call at 2 in the morning, my daughter's voice, distant and cold. "Mum, we can't do this anymore. The kids are at the house. We're not coming back." I was 62 then, planning my retirement after 40 years of teaching mathematics at Lincoln High. Instead, I found myself with 3 terrified children, ages 7, 5, and 3, staring up at me with tear-stained faces. "Where's Mummy?" James had asked, the youngest, clutching his dinosaur pajamas. I had no answer that wouldn't break their hearts further. So I simply said, "You're staying with Grandma now? Everything will be okay." And somehow, I made it okay. I worked 2 more years before retiring. I withdrew from my savings to cover braces and soccer uniforms. I learned to make dinosaur-shaped pancakes and stayed up helping with science projects. I became mother and father both, pushing aside my own grief and betrayal. Now, 20 years later, I watched as Emily clinked her glass, calling for attention. "We want to thank everyone who made this possible," she announced, her voice confident and practiced. "Our mentors and investors who believed in us." She nodded to a grey-haired man in an expensive suit. "Our business partners who trusted our vision?" More nods, more smiles. And of course each other. We couldn't have done this without our family bond. My 3 grandchildren stood together, arms linked, a perfect picture of success and togetherness. No mention of me, no acknowledgement of the sacrifices that got them here. I sat frozen, napkin twisted in my lap, a bitter taste spreading through my mouth. Around me, people applauded. The server refilled my water glass with a pitying smile. "Can I get you anything else, Ma'am?" he asked quietly. I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I stayed until the end, watching as they networked and celebrated. Not once did they come to check on me or invite me into their circle. When the crowd finally thinned, I gathered my purse and stood to leave. That's when Michael, my middle grandchild, spotted me. He hurried over, cheeks slightly flushed from champagne. "Grandma, you're heading out? Did you enjoy yourself?" I looked at him. This boy I had taught to ride a bike, who had cried on my shoulder after every heartbreak. "It was lovely," I lied. "Congratulations." He glanced over his shoulder, clearly eager to return to his important connections. "Thanks for coming. I'll call you soon, okay?" He wouldn't. The last time he'd called was 3 months ago, asking if I still had his college diploma in storage. I watched him walk away, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. Something shifted inside me then. A decision crystallized, clear and cold as ice. They had forgotten who I was, what I had done. But soon, very soon, they would remember. The drive home was quiet, just the sound of rain starting to fall, gentle at first, then harder, matching my mood. I pulled into my driveway, the same one where I had taught them all to ride bikes. The house looked dark and empty, a reflection of how I felt inside. I'd lived in this 3-bedroom colonial for 45 years, raised my daughter here, then her children after she abandoned them. The walls held memories in every crack and corner. Michael's height marks on the kitchen doorframe, Emily's ballet recital photos on the wall, James's science fair ribbons still pinned to the corkboard in what used to be his room. I hung my coat in the closet, kicked off my uncomfortable shoes, and made myself a cup of tea. My hands shook slightly as I stirred in the honey, not from age, but from the weight of the realization settling over me. For 20 years, I had put these children first. I had sacrificed my retirement plans, my savings, my time, my energy, everything I had, to give them the stable home their parents couldn't provide. I walked to my study, where decades of careful financial records sat in color-coded folders. A teacher's organization never quite leaves you. I pulled out the most recent statements, the ones I'd been ignoring for months because something about them had felt wrong. I spread them on the desk, alongside my reading glasses and an old calculator. The numbers didn't lie. Small withdrawals at first, dating back 3 years, when Emily had insisted I needed help managing my affairs as I got older. I was 82, but my mind was still sharp as ever. The retirement accounts I'd built over 40 years of teaching, supplemented by the modest insurance policy my husband had left when he died, they had been slowly, methodically drained. Not emptied, no. They were too clever for that. Just reduced, bit by bit. Always with plausible explanations. Elder care consultations that never happened. Home repairs I didn't need. Medical expenses that my insurance had actually covered. I felt the anger rising, not hot and explosive, but cold and calculating, the kind that forms over years of quiet disappointment. I remembered Emily's 16th birthday, how I'd worked nights at a local bookstore to afford the dress she wanted. Michael's college applications, how I'd spent hours helping him perfect his essays because his dyslexia made writing difficult. James's medical school tuition, how I'd taken out a second mortgage on this very house to help him achieve his dream. A dream he'd abandoned after 2 years to join his siblings in business. They had been planning this investment firm for years, it seemed. And somewhere along the way, they had decided that my sacrifices were simply the expected duty of a grandmother, that my resources were theirs by right, that I was a footnote in their story, not the foundation upon which they had built their success. I didn't cry. The time for tears had passed long ago. Instead, I began to make copies of every statement, every check, every suspicious transaction. I cross-referenced dates with their visits, noting how funds seemed to disappear shortly after Emily would help with my online banking. I documented everything meticulously, the teacher in me creating a perfect paper trail of their betrayal. By the time dawn broke through my curtains, I had 2 complete sets of evidence. One for me, one for the lawyer I would call later that day. My back ached from hours at the desk, but my mind felt clearer than it had in months. They thought I was just a helpless old woman, someone to be managed and eventually discarded. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The grandmother who had taught them their multiplication tables and kissed their scraped knees was about to teach them one final crucial lesson. Actions have consequences. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, official-looking envelope with all 3 of their signatures on the attached card. "Dear Grandma," it began, "we've been concerned about you living alone." What followed was carefully worded, professionally distant. They had found me a place at Sunset Acres, a retirement community on the outskirts of town. They had already paid the deposit. They had already scheduled the move. "It's for the best," Emily had said when she called to confirm I'd received the letter. "The house is too big for you to manage, and we worry." The house they had grown up in. The house where I had raised them after their parents abandoned them. The house that was fully paid off and completely manageable for me at 82. I didn't argue on the phone. I simply listened, thanked her for her concern, and hung up. Then I sat in my garden, watching the roses I'd tended for 30 years, and made a new plan. Sunset Acres wasn't terrible if you enjoyed beige walls and the constant smell of industrial cleaner. My room was small, but private. A concession they had made to assuage their guilt, no doubt. The window overlooked a sad little courtyard where residents were wheeled out on nice days to feel the sun on their faces. I arranged my few permitted belongings, some clothes, a handful of books, the photo albums they hadn't bothered to look through when they packed me up. "You'll adjust quickly," the cheerful intake coordinator promised. "We have bingo on Wednesdays." I smiled politely and waited for her to leave. Once alone, I removed the false bottom from my jewelry box, the one thing Emily had insisted I bring. For safekeeping. Beneath it lay what they had never found. The key to understanding exactly what my grandchildren had become. A USB drive containing 20 years of documents, records, and evidence. The first week passed slowly. They visited once, all 3 together, a united front with gift baskets and practiced smiles. "The house sold quickly," Michael informed me proudly. "Well above asking price." I nodded, not mentioning that the house had been my last gift to them in my will. Now it was gone. The money presumably in their investment fund. "We've set up a monthly allowance for you," Emily added, showing me the paperwork. "For little extras." James at least had the grace to look uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and avoiding my eyes. He had always been the sensitive one. "You didn't need to do that," I said quietly. "My pension and social security are adequate." Emily patted my hand. "We want to take care of you, Grandma, like you took care of us." There was no acknowledgement in her voice of what that care had cost me, no recognition of the cruel irony in her words. They left after 45 minutes, promising to visit again soon. They wouldn't, not altogether. Emily might stop by occasionally, clipboard in hand, checking me off her list of responsibilities. The facility had a small computer room for residents, outdated machines that most couldn't or wouldn't use. Perfect for my needs. Late that night, when the halls were quiet and the night staff distracted with their rounds, I made my way there. The USB drive contained everything, copies of checks I'd written for their education, documentation of the college funds I'd established, the second mortgage I'd taken out to fund James's medical school. But more importantly, it contained what I'd discovered by accident 3 years ago, evidence of financial manipulation that had begun the moment they gained access to my accounts to help manage my affairs. Small transfers at first, then larger sums, all disguised as necessary expenses. I wasn't as oblivious as they thought. Before retirement, I had taught mathematics and basic accounting. I had noticed the discrepancies, but said nothing, curious to see how far they would go. The answer, it seemed, was very far indeed. Their new investment firm was built partly on money siphoned from my accounts over years, not enough to leave me destitute, but enough to fund their ambitions while they waited for the house. The documentation was meticulous. I had account numbers, dates, forged signatures, enough to cause serious legal problems for 3 up-and-coming financial advisors. I wasn't vindictive by nature. I had loved these children with everything I had. But love without respect is a hollow thing, and they had made their choices clear. Now, I would make mine. I carefully copied the files onto a fresh drive, then composed 3 letters, one to each grandchild. The days at Sunset Acres blended together in a monotony of scheduled activities and bland meals. Breakfast at 7:30, medications at 8, exercise class at 9, gentle chair movements to music from the 1950s. Lunch at noon, followed by mandatory social hour in the common room. Then crafts or a movie, or sometimes a visitor from the local elementary school who would read aloud while we sat in a semicircle, some dozing, others straining to hear through failing ears. Dinner at 5, more medications at 6, lights out, suggested by 9. A life stripped of autonomy, of purpose, of dignity. I observed my fellow residents with both compassion and determination not to surrender to the same quiet despair. Mrs. Rodriguez, in the room across from mine, had pictures of grandchildren who never visited. Mr. Peterson, down the hall, still asked the nurses when his wife was coming, though she had passed 3 years ago. I made allies strategically. The night orderly, Jose, who missed his own grandmother in El Salvador, and appreciated the Spanish phrases I had learned specifically to converse with him. The kitchen assistant, Darlene, who slipped me extra cookies with a conspiratorial wink when no one was looking. The janitor, Ray, who fixed the lock on my door so it would actually secure, unlike the flimsy mechanisms on most residents' rooms. Small kindnesses exchanged, human connections formed in this sterile environment. I needed these allies because what I was planning required privacy and occasional blind eyes turned. I found an unexpected friend in my neighbour Irene, a former civil rights attorney whose mind remained razor-sharp despite her 91 years. She recognised something in me, a spark, a plan, and offered her legal knowledge without my having to ask. "They think we're finished," she told me one afternoon as we sat in the garden, away from prying ears. "That's their first mistake." I nodded, watching a hummingbird dart among the sad institutional flowers. "I raised them better than this," I said quietly. Irene's laugh was dry, like autumn leaves. "My dear, we all raise them better than what they become. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She didn't press when I remained silent, but her knowing smile told me she approved of whatever she saw in my expression. That night, I finished my letters, each one tailored to the grandchild it addressed. For Emily, facts and figures, the language she respected. For Michael, emotional appeals intermingled with firm boundaries. For James, disappointment and hope in equal measure. He had always been the one most sensitive to my approval. I sealed each envelope carefully, my arthritic fingers moving with purpose. Tomorrow would be family visiting day, though I expected no visitors. Perfect timing to set my plan in motion. I slept soundly that night for the first time since moving to Sunset Acres. The weight of indecision lifted from my shoulders. My dreams were not of revenge or justice, but of restoration, of the family I had fought to build from the broken pieces left behind by my daughter. I dreamed of Sunday dinners and genuine laughter, of respect freely given rather than demanded. I would not live forever, that much was certain. But I refused to leave this world having failed in my final lesson to these children. That care without love is empty, success without integrity is hollow, and actions, no matter how carefully disguised, always have consequences. The envelopes were delivered by courier the following Monday, marked personal and confidential. Inside each was a letter and a copy of the evidence pertaining to their individual actions. I raised you to be better than this, I wrote. I gave you everything I had, not so you could become successful, but so you could become good people. You have achieved only half of what I hoped for. I didn't threaten or demand. I simply stated facts. I knew what they had done. I had documented proof. I was disappointed beyond words. And finally, I would be leaving Sunset Acres at the end of the week to stay with my sister in Arizona. What you do with this information is your choice, I concluded. But know that your actions have consequences, just as mine did when I chose to raise you. I signed each letter simply, Grandma, and sealed them with hands that no longer trembled. The reaction was swift and dramatic. Emily arrived first, bursting into my room without knocking, face pale beneath her perfect makeup. "What is this?" she demanded, waving the envelope. "Some kind of blackmail?" I was sitting by the window, knitting a scarf I had no use for. I didn't look up. "It's the truth, Emily. Something this family has been short on lately." She paced the small room, heels clicking aggressively on the linoleum. "These are baseless accusations. I've never stolen from you. We've only ever tried to help manage your finances." I set my knitting aside then and looked at her directly. "Emily, I taught you to balance your first checkbook. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" Something flickered across her face. Fear, perhaps, or the ghost of shame. "This will ruin everything we've built," she said, voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Is that what you want? To destroy your own grandchildren?" I stood slowly, my old joints protesting. What I wanted was to see the children I raised become honest adults. What I wanted was to be treated with dignity in my final years, not hidden away while you spent my money. My voice remained calm, but Emily flinched as if I'd shouted. "We're family," she said, a last desperate appeal. "Yes," I agreed. "We are. That's why the second copies of those files are with my lawyer, not the police." She stared at me, calculating even now. Michael arrived 20 minutes after Emily left. His approach different, but no more effective. He tried charm, then reason, then barely veiled threats about my mental competence. James came last, late in the evening. He didn't argue or threaten. He sat on the edge of my bed and cried. Actually cried. For the first time since he was 12. "I knew it was wrong," he admitted. "I just didn't know how to stop it once it started." I hadn't expected remorse, not really. I had prepared myself for anger, denial, even abandonment. James's tears caught me off guard, tugging at the grandmother in me who still remembered the little boy with dinosaur pajamas. "Why?" I asked him simply. "You were all doing well. You had educations, opportunities. Why take from me?" He wiped his eyes, looking suddenly young despite his 30 years. "It was Emily's idea at first. Just small amounts to help launch the business. Then it got easier, and you never said anything, and he trailed off, realizing how hollow it sounded. We convinced ourselves you'd want us to succeed, that the ends justified the means. I shook my head slowly. Success without integrity isn't success, James. It's just failure in expensive clothing. He looked down at his hands, the manicured nails, the signet ring he'd bought himself when the first big clients signed on. What happens now? He asked, voice small. I offered him a tissue from the box on my nightstand, watching as he twisted it between his fingers. Despite everything, my heart ached for him, for all of them. That depends on you three, I replied. I'm not interested in revenge, James. I'm interested in redemption, yours and mine. His eyes met mine, confusion evident. What does that mean? I took a deep breath. It means I'm leaving this place. My sister Martha has invited me to stay with her in Arizona. I'm 82 years old. I don't know how many years I have left, but I won't spend them here, forgotten and pushed aside. James started to protest, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. The evidence I have, the documentation of what you three have done, it could end your careers before they truly begin. But that's not what I want. I moved to sit beside him on the bed, my weight barely making an impression compared to his. What I want is acknowledgement. What I want is for the three of you to recognize what you've done, not just to my finances, but to our family. What I want is for you to find a way to make this right. James swallowed hard. Emily won't admit to anything. She'll fight this. His voice was barely audible. And Michael follows her lead. Always has. I nodded, unsurprised. Then the question becomes, James, what will you do? Will you follow her lead too? Or will you remember the values I tried to teach you? I didn't touch him. Didn't reach for his hand like I wanted to. This wasn't a moment for comfort. This was a moment for choice. He stood slowly, shoulders hunched like they carried a physical weight. I need to think, he said. I nodded. Yes, you do. All of you do. I'll be here until Friday. Then I'm leaving, with or without your resolution. After he left, I sat alone in the dim light of my room, listening to the muffled sounds of the facility at night, the squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum, the distant hum of the medication cart being wheeled from room to room, the occasional moan or call from residents caught in the confusion between wakefulness and sleep. I wondered if I had done the right thing. I could have stayed silent, accepted their betrayal as the price of maintaining a semblance of family. I could have lived out my remaining years in this place, grateful for occasional visits and the illusion of care. Many in my position would have. But something in me, the same stubborn core that had enabled me to raise 3 abandoned children in my 60s, refused to accept such a hollow ending to my story. I had given them life, stability, love. I had shaped their characters, or tried to. Now I would force them to confront what they had become. The facility went quiet around 11 p.m., lights dimmed, residents settled. I pulled out my small laptop, another item Emily had reluctantly allowed me to keep, and opened my email. A message from Martha confirmed she was ready for my arrival. Another from Irene's son, the lawyer who had agreed to hold copies of my evidence, assured me everything was in order. A third, unexpected, from my old colleague from Lincoln High, offering to drive me to the airport on Friday. Small pieces falling into place, a network of support I had almost forgotten existed outside the narrow circle of my grandchildren. I hadn't told them about these connections, hadn't mentioned that while they were busy building their business, I had been quietly maintaining friendships, relationships, a life beyond being their grandmother. They had reduced me to a role, a function, a checkbook. They were about to discover that I was, and always had been, much more than that. Tuesday passed without contact from any of them. On Wednesday, I received a formal-looking envelope delivered by courier. Inside was a legal document, drafted on the letterhead of their investment firm. A proposed settlement agreement, offering to repay the disputed funds in full, with interest, in exchange for my silence and destruction of all evidence. No admission of wrongdoing, no apology. Just a business transaction, cold and impersonal, exactly like the relationship they had created with me. I placed it on my bedside table without signing. Thursday morning brought another visitor, Michael, this time in full business attire, looking harried and impatient. "Did you get our offer?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. I gestured to the document. I did. "And?" I met his gaze steadily. "Is this how you plan to solve this problem, Michael? With legal documents and financial settlements?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that for a moment I saw the boy who had struggled with multiplication tables until we created a game to help him learn. "Grandma, be reasonable. We're trying to make this right." I laughed, a sound that startled both of us with its bitterness. "No, Michael. You're trying to make this go away. There's a difference." I stood up, my full height still several inches shorter than his. "I didn't raise you to solve problems by throwing money at them or hiding behind legal language. I raised you to face your mistakes honestly, to apologize sincerely, and to make genuine amends." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "Emily says—" I cut him off firmly. "I'm not interested in what Emily says. I'm interested in what Michael thinks, Michael feels, Michael believes is the right thing to do." The meeting was held in the facility's private dining room, an upgrade from my beige shoebox. All three arrived promptly, dressed for business despite the Sunday hour. They'd had a week to consider their options, to consult with lawyers, to weigh the cost of fighting me versus making amends. I'd invited my sister Martha to join us, a stern-faced woman who had never married or had children of her own, but who possessed a razor-sharp mind and a fierce loyalty to me. "You don't need to do this alone," she'd insisted when I called her. The tension in the room was palpable as we all sat down, 5 people bound by blood and betrayal. Emily spoke first, naturally. "We've discussed the situation," she began, formal as if addressing clients. "We acknowledge that certain financial improprieties may have occurred." I raised an eyebrow at her careful phrasing. Martha snorted softly beside me. "What your granddaughter means," Michael interjected, shooting Emily a warning look, "is that we're sorry. We took advantage of your trust in ways that were unethical and illegal." The admission clearly cost him, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. "We're prepared to make full restitution," he continued, sliding a folder across the table, "with interest." I didn't open it immediately. Instead, I looked at each of them in turn, these children I had raised, now adults making the hardest confession of their lives. James couldn't meet my eyes. Emily's posture was defensive, arms crossed tightly. Michael attempted a conciliatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The money was never the point," I said finally, "though I'll accept your restitution. What matters is what happens next." They exchanged glances, confusion evident. They had expected demands, anger, perhaps even the legal consequences I'd hinted at. They hadn't expected a lesson. "I'm moving to Arizona with Martha next week," I continued calmly. "I've already given notice here. The restitution you're offering will fund my new life quite adequately." Martha nodded beside me, a small, satisfied smile on her face. But that leaves you with a choice to make. I opened the folder, verified the figures without comment, then closed it again. Your business is built partly on dishonesty. You can continue that way, always looking over your shoulders, always wondering if today is the day your fraud is discovered. Or you can choose a different path. Emily's expression hardened. What exactly are you suggesting? I met her gaze steadily. Full disclosure to your investors about where your initial funding really came from. Establishment of a foundation in my name to help grandparents raising grandchildren after parental abandonment. And regular, meaningful contact with me for as long as I live. Not out of obligation, but as a chance to rebuild what you've broken. The silence that followed was deafening. Martha reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture of solidarity. Finally, Michael spoke. The disclosure could ruin us. We could lose our licenses, our clients. I nodded, acknowledging the risk. Actions have consequences, Michael. I raised you to face them honestly. James looked up then, something like resolution in his eyes. We'll do it, he said quietly. Emily turned to him, incredulous. You can't be serious. We've worked too hard. We stole from Grandma. James cut her off. From the woman who took us in when our own parents couldn't be bothered? Who worked extra years so we could have what we needed? Who came to every school play and game and graduation? His voice broke slightly. And then we put her in a home and tried to forget she existed. I'm done pretending that's okay. Michael hesitated, then nodded slowly. James is right. We owe her this. We owe ourselves this. Emily stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is emotional blackmail, she snapped, glaring at me. You're using guilt to punish us. Martha started to respond, but I placed a hand on her arm, silencing her. This was between me and my grandchildren. Is that what you think this is, Emily? Punishment? I kept my voice soft, compelling her to listen closely. When you were 9 years old, you stole $5 from my purse to buy candy. Do you remember what happened? Her eyes flickered with recognition. You made me return the candy and apologize to the store owner. Then I had to do extra chores to earn the money back. I nodded. Was that punishment? Or was it teaching you that actions have consequences, that making mistakes is human, but refusing to correct them is a choice? She remained standing, but something in her rigid posture softened slightly. That was different. We were children then. I shook my head. The principle is the same, Emily. You took something that wasn't yours. Now you have a choice about how to respond, with denial and anger, or with integrity and growth. She sank back into her chair, not conceding, but at least listening. James leaned forward, addressing his siblings. Think about what Grandma's asking. Disclosure to our investors? Yes, it will be humiliating and difficult. Some might leave, but the ones who stay will trust us more because we were honest. The foundation. It's a chance to help others in the situation Grandma was in when Mom left. How can we argue against that? Michael nodded slowly. And staying in touch, actually being a family again, that's not a punishment. That's what we should have been doing all along. I watched them carefully. These 3 adults, who had once been children dependent on my care. They had grown so distant, so focused on appearance and success, that they had lost sight of the foundation upon which that success was built. Now they were being asked to look back, to acknowledge, to make amends in ways more meaningful than simply writing a check. Emily was the last holdout, her mind visibly working through calculations of risk and benefit. If we do this, disclosure, foundation, family reconnection, then what? The evidence disappears? You never speak of this again? I considered her question, understanding the businesswoman's need for clear terms. The evidence stays with my lawyer, in trust. If you follow through on your commitments, it remains private forever. If not, I let the implication hang in the air, not needing to elaborate. Martha shifted beside me, her expression making it clear she thought I was being too lenient. One more condition, I added, watching Emily's expression carefully. The three of you will attend family therapy together to address whatever led you to believe this behavior was acceptable. James nodded immediately. Michael looked uncomfortable, but resigned. Emily's jaw tightened. Therapy? Like we're dysfunctional? I smiled sadly. Emily, you stole from your grandmother and hid her away in a retirement home to cover your tracks. If that's not dysfunction, I don't know what is. For the first time, a flash of genuine shame crossed her face. The perfect, controlled Emily showed a crack in her armor. Fine, she said finally. Disclosure, foundation, therapy, family time? But I want something too. I raised an eyebrow, waiting. I want you to try to understand why we did it. Not to excuse it, but to understand that we weren't just being greedy monsters. We were desperate, scared of failing, of disappointing you. Her admission surprised me. I had not expected vulnerability from Emily, of all people. I can try, I said softly. That's all any of us can do. Martha cleared her throat, breaking the moment. Now that we've established the terms, let's put this in writing. I've taken the liberty of drafting an agreement. She pulled out her own folder, sliding copies to each of my grandchildren. Always prepared, my sister. The rest of the meeting was spent reviewing terms, making minor adjustments, initialing pages. It felt surreal, formalizing forgiveness, documenting redemption. But perhaps this generation needed that structure, that contractual certainty. By the time we finished, nearly 3 hours had passed. The facility staff had long since cleared away the water glasses and notepads they'd provided, leaving us to our private reconciliation. As we stood to leave, James approached me hesitantly. "Can I hug you, Grandma?" he asked, voice uncertain. I opened my arms without a word, and he stepped into them, his tall frame bending to accommodate my smaller one. Michael joined next, his embrace awkward but genuine. Emily stood apart, watching. I met her eyes over her brother's shoulders, extending one hand toward her. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, not joining the embrace but offering this small connection. A beginning, perhaps. Martha watched the scene with guarded approval, her natural skepticism tempered by hope. As they filed out of the room, Martha lingered behind. "You're too soft on them," she chided gently when we were alone. I shook my head, suddenly tired from the emotional weight of the confrontation. "No, Martha, I'm exactly as soft as I need to be. They're still my grandchildren." She squeezed my shoulder. "Yes, they are. God help them and you both." 6 months later, I sat on the porch of Martha's Arizona home, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The heat of the day was fading, leaving behind a pleasant warmth that eased my old bones. The sound of a car in the driveway made me smile, right on time. The door opened, and James stepped out, carrying a small suitcase and a bag of groceries. "Grandma," he called, his face breaking into a genuine smile. "I brought those chilies you like from the market." Behind him, Michael emerged, balancing several wrapped packages. "And we stopped at that bakery you mentioned last time," he added. They came every fourth weekend now, taking turns, or sometimes together. The visits had been awkward at first, stilted conversations, and careful politeness. But slowly, something real had begun to grow in the desert soil of our new relationship. Emily hadn't come this time. She was the most resistant to the changes, the most reluctant to face what they had done. But she was trying in her own way. The foundation had been her project in the end. Her organizational skills turned towards something meaningful. The Margaret Turner Foundation for Generational Care had already helped 7 families in situations like ours had been, providing financial advice, practical support, and legal assistance. The business had survived the disclosure, though not without consequences. They had lost clients, paid fines, endured probationary periods, but those who stayed valued the honesty, the commitment to making amends. "It's different now," Michael had told me last visit. "Better, in a way. I can look our clients in the eye without that knot in my stomach." That night, we ate together on the porch, sharing a meal and conversation that felt almost like it had years ago, before ambition and greed had corrupted the love. James helped me to my feet as the stars began to appear, his touch gentle on my elbow. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, voice hesitant. "The dinosaur pancakes you used to make us on Saturdays. How did you get the shape so perfect?" I laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet yard. "Practice, James. Hours of practice while you were all still sleeping." His expression sobered. "You did so much for us that we never saw." I patted his hand where it rested on my arm. That's what love is sometimes. The invisible work. Later, after they had gone to their hotel for the night, promising to return for breakfast, Martha joined me for a final cup of tea. "You've done the impossible," she observed. "You made them see you again." I shook my head, watching the moon rise over the mountains. Not impossible, just necessary. For them as much as for me. The following Tuesday brought something unexpected. A phone call from Emily. "I've been thinking," she said, bypassing the usual pleasantries. "The foundation is doing well, but it's missing something." I settled into my favorite chair, curious. "What's that?" "You," she replied simply. "Your voice, your experience. We have financial advisors and lawyers, but we don't have the perspective of someone who's lived it." I considered her words carefully. Emily had always been strategic, focused on outcomes. This suggestion felt different, genuine, thoughtful. "What did you have in mind?" I asked finally. She outlined her idea, a regular support group led by me, initially via video conference, but eventually, perhaps, in person when I felt up to traveling. "These grandparents, they're facing what you faced," she explained. "But most of them don't have your strength, your education, your resources. They need more than money and legal advice. They need hope." I recognized the irony. The granddaughter who had once hidden me away, now wanting to place me front and center in her project. But I also recognized the opportunity. "I'll think about it," I promised, not wanting to commit too quickly. After we hung up, I sat with the idea, turning it over in my mind. For decades, I had defined myself primarily as a caretaker, teacher, mother, grandmother. When that role had been diminished by my grandchildren's betrayal, I had felt lost, invisible. Now I was being offered a new role, one that honored my experience rather than dismissing it. Martha found me still sitting there an hour later, staring out at the desert landscape. "Emily," she guessed, noting my contemplative mood. I nodded. "She wants me to lead a support group for the foundation." Martha raised an eyebrow. "And you're considering it?" "I am," I admitted. "Is that foolish, after everything?" Martha settled into the chair opposite mine, her expression thoughtful. "Margaret, you've spent your life taking care of others, your students, your daughter, your grandchildren. Even when they betrayed you, your response wasn't to punish them, but to try to make them better people." She leaned forward, her gaze direct. "Maybe it's time to use all that wisdom and experience to help people who actually want it, who will value it properly." I smiled at her characteristic bluntness. "You think I should do it?" She nodded decisively. "I think you should do what gives your life meaning and purpose. If that's helping other grandparents navigate the mess your daughter left you with, then yes. Do it on your terms, with clear boundaries. But do it." The next morning, I called Emily back with my decision. The relief and genuine pleasure in her voice confirmed I had made the right choice. "We'll set everything up," she promised. "You just need to be yourself." The first session was scheduled for the following month, enough time for Emily to organize logistics and for me to prepare what I wanted to say. I spent hours at Martha's kitchen table, making notes, remembering the challenges, the victories, the moments of doubt and determination that had defined my journey as a grandparent turned parent. I wanted to be honest without being discouraging, hopeful without being unrealistic. The day of the video call arrived, and I found myself nervous in a way I hadn't been since my early days of teaching. Martha helped me set up her laptop on the dining room table, adjusted the lighting so my face was clearly visible, then discreetly left the house to give me privacy. When the screen filled with faces, 8 grandparents ranging in age from 55 to 72, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion, determination, and hope, my nervousness vanished. These were my people. They understood what it meant to have life's plans upended by responsibility that should never have been theirs. "My name is Margaret Turner," I began, my teacher's voice returning naturally after years of disuse. 23 years ago, my daughter left her 3 children with me and never came back. The youngest was 3, the oldest 7. I was 62. Planning my retirement after 40 years of teaching. Instead, I found myself raising a second family. I paused, looking at each face on the screen. "I'm not here to tell you it's easy. It's not. I'm not here to tell you that you won't sometimes resent this responsibility, that you won't grieve for the life you thought you would have. You will." A woman in the corner of the screen nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "But I am here to tell you that you're stronger than you think, that the work you're doing matters more than you can possibly know, and that you're not alone." For the next hour, I listened more than I spoke. These strangers sharing their struggles, their fears, their small victories. When the session ended, I sat quietly at the empty table, emotionally drained, but filled with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "How did it go?" I typed back a simple response. "They needed this, so did I." Her reply came quickly. "Same time next month?" I smiled to myself. "Yes," I wrote, "but I want to expand it. Individual mentoring for those who need it." Martha returned to find me still at the table, making notes for future sessions. "Well?" she asked, setting down groceries on the counter. "It was—" I paused, searching for the right word. "Necessary, like you said." She nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now come help me with dinner. Being meaningful and purposeful doesn't get you out of chopping vegetables." I laughed, rising to join her in the kitchen, my movements lighter than they had been in months. Years later, when I finally closed my eyes for the last time, I wasn't alone. I wasn't forgotten in some facility, marked only by a room number and a chart. I was home, surrounded by family who saw me, truly saw me, as the woman who had given everything and finally, in the end, received the recognition and love she deserved in return. The obituary they wrote mentioned teacher, grandmother, founder of the Margaret Turner Foundation. But the eulogy James delivered spoke of something simpler and more profound. She taught us, through forgiveness, harsher than any punishment, that it's never too late to become the people we should have been all along. In the end, that was my revenge, my justice, my legacy. Not the exposure of their wrongs, but the reclamation of their hearts. I was the silent caretaker who spoke up at last, and in doing so, saved not only myself, but the children I had never stopped loving, even when they forgot how to love me.